The morning air was cool and quiet when the woman stepped off the bus near the old concert hall. The building stood tall with stone walls and wide doors, the kind of place that made people straighten their backs without knowing why. She paused for a moment on the sidewalk, holding a small folder close to her chest. Inside it were a few papers and a wrinkled audition slip. She looked up at the building, then down at her shoes, which had been cleaned as best as she could manage. They were still worn, still plain, but they were hers. She took a slow breath and walked toward the entrance. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because she was tired, but because her thoughts were loud. She reminded herself why she was there. She had practiced for years, often late at night when the house was quiet and no one needed her help. She had practiced when her fingers were sore and when doubt crept in. Today was not about proving anything to anyone else. It was about honoring the music she loved. Inside the hall, the space opened wide. High ceilings curved above polished floors. Soft light spilled from tall windows, landing on rows of chairs arranged with care. At the far end of the room sat a grand piano, its black surface shining under the lights. The sight of it made her heart beat faster. She signed in at a small table near the door and was given a number written in pen. The volunteer smiled politely, but said nothing more. Other people waited along the sides of the room. Most were younger, dressed in sharp clothes, holding expensive-looking music cases. Some stretched their fingers. Some whispered to each other. A few glanced at her as she walked to an empty chair near the back. Their looks were quick but curious, like they were trying to place her and could not. She sat down and folded her hands in her lap. Her dress was simple, a soft color that did not draw attention. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She had chosen comfort over style, knowing she needed to feel steady today. Still, she felt out of place, like a quiet note in a loud song. As time passed, more contestants arrived. The room filled with low chatter and nervous laughter. From where she sat, she could hear bits of conversation. People talked about music schools, private teachers, and competitions in faraway cities. Some spoke with confidence, others with practiced calm. She listened but did not join in. Her journey had been different. There were no schools or special lessons, only a piano that had seen better days and a strong wish to learn. Near the front of the room, a long table was set for the judges. They entered together, carrying papers and cups of coffee. Their clothes were formal, their faces serious. When they sat down, the room grew quieter. The audition was about to begin. One by one, numbers were called. Each performer walked to the piano, played their piece, and left the stage. Some played well, some made small mistakes. The judges wrote notes, sometimes whispering to each other. Applause was polite but brief. The woman watched closely, studying the piano, the way each person sat, the way the room seemed to hold its breath during the music. As the numbers climbed, she checked her slip again. Her turn was still far off. She used the time to steady herself. She closed her eyes and imagined the keys beneath her fingers. She did not imagine the judges or the audience. She imagined the sound she wanted to make, warm and clear. At one point, a pair of contestants sitting nearby began to talk in low voices. They glanced in her direction and smiled in a way that did not reach their eyes. One of them leaned closer and whispered something. The other let out a small laugh, quickly covering it with a cough. The woman noticed but looked away. She had learned long ago that some people judged what they could see and stopped there. A judge called another number. A young performer walked confidently to the piano, played a fast piece, and left to strong applause. The judges nodded, clearly impressed. The woman felt a familiar mix of nerves and calm. She knew she did not look like the others. She also knew looks had never told her whole story. She thought back to the first time she touched a piano. It had been in a small room, the keys slightly yellowed, some of them sticking. She had pressed one key and listened as the sound filled the space. In that moment, something had opened inside her. Music became a place where worries softened and time slowed. That feeling had stayed with her through every hard day. The hall shifted as people moved in their seats. A few contestants stretched or rolled their shoulders. Someone checked their reflection in a phone screen. The woman adjusted the folder in her hands and took another slow breath. Her fingers were warm now, ready. When her number was finally called, there was a brief pause. The judge looked up, scanning the room. The woman stood. As she walked forward, she felt eyes on her. Some were curious, some were doubtful. A few held quiet surprise. Her steps were steady, even though her heart raced. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. The bench was adjusted. The lights felt brighter up close. She could sense the judges watching her carefully. One of them raised an eyebrow slightly, glancing at her papers. Another leaned back in their chair, arms crossed. She sat down gently, smoothing her dress before placing her hands on her lap. The piano was cool beneath her fingers when she touched the edge. She did not rush. She knew this moment mattered, not because of what others thought, but because she had waited a long time to be here. The room was quiet now. Even the small sounds seemed loud, a chair creaking, a soft breath. She looked at the keys, each one familiar, each one holding a promise. For a brief second, doubt tried to creep in. Then she remembered the nights of practice, the joy of music, and the reason she came. She lifted her hands and prepared to play, unaware that many in the room had already made up their minds about her. To them, she was just a simple woman at an audition. To herself, she was ready to tell a story through sound. The woman sat at the piano, feeling the smooth keys beneath her fingertips. The room seemed quieter now, as if it was holding its breath. Some contestants looked her way with subtle smirks, clearly thinking they knew what to expect. One young man leaned slightly toward his friend, whispering something with a small laugh. She did not glance up. She had learned long ago that people often judged what they could see, not what they could hear or feel. Her mind wandered briefly to the first piano she had ever played. A small upright with chipped black paint and keys that sometimes stuck. She had spent countless hours in that tiny room, learning from memory, from mistakes, and from sheer persistence. No teacher had guided her. No one had told her how to sit or how to press a key correctly. She had discovered the language of music herself, note by note, sound by sound. The audition hall felt different from that little room, grand and intimidating. The polished wood gleamed under the lights, the ceiling was high and distant, and the judges looked on with critical eyes. Still, she focused on the keys, her hands poised above them. Each finger was ready, and each note held a memory of dedication, of late nights and quiet mornings. She began to play. At first, the notes were gentle, soft, almost hesitant. Her hands moved slowly across the keys, finding the rhythm she had practiced so many times alone. A judge scribbled a note on a sheet of paper, eyes fixed on her. Another leaned back in their chair, expression neutral. The audience, a mix of fellow contestants and a few staff members, watched with quiet curiosity. Whispers traveled across the room. "She doesn't look like much," someone murmured. Another shook their head. Some smiled politely but with doubt in their eyes. The woman felt it, the wave of judgment, but she did not let it reach her. She had faced skepticism before, often from herself, sometimes from others, and she had learned to let the music speak louder than words. The melody began to flow more confidently. Her fingers danced over the keys with a fluidity that surprised even her. Each chord carried emotion. Each pause spoke of understanding. Each rise and fall told a story. The room seemed to change around her. The whispers faded. The smirks disappeared. Even the judge, who had seemed distant, now leaned slightly forward, pen in hand, but attention fully captured. As she played, memories came to her. The evenings spent in dim light, the fingertips sore from pressing the keys. The early mornings when she practiced before anyone else in the house woke up. There were times she had wanted to give up, times when doubt whispered that she was not enough. Yet every time, the music had called her back, gently, insistently, as if reminding her that persistence could turn a simple sound into something extraordinary. A young contestant in the front row shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his sheet music and then at her. He had played a complicated piece earlier with precision but little feeling. Now, listening to her, he felt a subtle sting of envy. The judges' expressions changed as well. One closed their eyes briefly, letting the notes wash over them. Another tapped a pencil against the paper, thinking carefully. Realizing that appearances had deceived them, the woman did not rush. Each section of the piece was deliberate, each note carrying meaning. She allowed small pauses, not out of hesitation, but to let the audience feel the sound, to let the music breathe. Her heart raced, but not with fear. It was the familiar excitement of performing, of telling a story only she could tell in this way. She remembered the encouragement she had received from the few who had truly listened in her life. A neighbor who had clapped softly after her first recital in the living room. A cousin who had smiled at her persistence even when no one else seemed to care. Those small gestures had carried her forward when the world felt heavy and dismissive. She felt their quiet presence beside her now, unseen but palpable. Some audience members had begun to shift in their seats. A few leaned closer. The judge, who had once raised an eyebrow, now held both hands together, leaning forward, face attentive. The room was no longer a place of skepticism. It was a place of connection, built by the sound that flowed from her fingers. She thought about the notes, the way each one told a part of her story, a part of every quiet struggle and every small victory. The music was her voice, the piano her companion, the room her stage. She had practiced in silence, learned in solitude, and now, finally, she had the chance to share it openly. A soft sigh came from one of the contestants nearby, a sound of surprise and admiration. Another whispered under their breath, "I didn't expect that." The woman remained focused, not letting the small distractions pull her attention. Every note mattered, every expression of sound held meaning. She was not playing for approval. She was playing because the music demanded it, and she had something to say. The judges were silent now. Pens paused, eyes fixed, each waiting for the next measure. The hall felt smaller, more intimate, though it was still grand. Every sound resonated, every chord echoed against the walls, carrying the depth of years she had spent in practice. It was not a show of skill alone. It was an expression of life itself, the challenges, the joys, the quiet determination that had brought her here. She continued to play, moving from one passage to another with grace and intent. Her hands never faltered. The flow of music was steady and assured. In that moment, she was not aware of judgments, whispers, or expectations. She was aware only of the story unfolding beneath her fingers, the story of a woman who had refused to be limited by circumstance. The audience began to lean in, the energy in the room shifting. The woman could feel it, not as a pressure but as a shared understanding. Music had the power to change perception, to open hearts, and she was witnessing it happen in real time. Even the young contestant who had smirked earlier now sat still, captivated by the sound. Her mind briefly touched on her journey to get here, the long walks to practice rooms, the evenings spent listening to recordings to understand subtle nuances, the moments when she had learned not just technique but patience. Every step, every struggle, every small triumph had led her to this very moment at this very piano. As she reached the middle section of her piece, the dynamics grew. Her hands moved with a mixture of strength and delicacy, producing sound that was both powerful and tender. The room was enveloped in music, and for a moment, the world outside did not exist. There were no doubts, no judgments, no whispers. There was only the sound and the story it told. One of the judges leaned slightly, an almost imperceptible movement, but enough to show complete attention. Another tapped their pencil against the paper softly, not in boredom, but in reflection. The others were still, faces thoughtful, letting the music speak to them before any words could form. The woman noticed none of this directly, but she felt the change in energy, the shift from doubt to engagement. The notes carried weight now, each chord resonating with emotion. She thought about the people who had doubted her, the few who had encouraged her, and the countless hours she had spent alone. Music had been her companion, teacher, and friend. It had been the constant in a world that sometimes felt unsure. Now, in this grand hall, it was also her voice. Her fingers moved over the keys with growing confidence. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. The judge's initial skepticism had softened, replaced with curiosity and admiration. Some contestants glanced at each other, wide-eyed, realizing they had underestimated her. The woman played on, unaware of the change in perception, focused entirely on the story she was telling. As she neared the end of the piece, the intensity grew. Her heart pounded not from fear but from the joy of expression, from the release of years of silent dedication. She allowed herself to feel every note, every movement, every moment. This was her, fully present, sharing the essence of herself through music. When the final notes lingered in the air, the room was silent, a deep, absorbing silence, the kind that comes when something unexpected and beautiful has touched everyone. The woman sat, hands still above the keys, breathing steadily. Her eyes opened slowly, meeting the gazes of the judges and the audience. The silence spoke louder than any applause could. For a moment, no one moved. The whispers, the smirks, the doubts, all were gone. Only the music remained, echoing softly in the minds and hearts of those who had listened. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not from recognition, but from the knowledge that she had played truthfully, with all the care, patience, and love she had cultivated over years. Finally, a gentle applause began, small at first, then growing steadily. The judges nodded, some smiling with genuine warmth. Contestants clapped, some with hesitant respect, others with sincere admiration. The woman rose from the bench, her back straight, her hands still slightly trembling, and acknowledged the room with a soft, humble bow. The reaction was more than she had hoped for, yet she remained centered, Music had always been about more than approval or accolades. It had been about connection, expression, and persistence. Today, she realized, her years of quiet dedication had spoken louder than any assumptions, louder than any glance of doubt, and that was more than enough. After the applause settled, the woman stepped back from the piano with a sense of quiet fulfillment. She could feel her hands still buzzing from the energy of the performance, her heart steady but alive. The room had shifted. The earlier smirks and whispers had dissolved into a mix of astonishment and admiration. She was aware of eyes following her, some filled with respect, others with surprise that she had exceeded expectations so completely. She returned to her seat near the back of the hall. The room was still buzzing quietly, conversations picking up again, but now they had a different tone. Contestants whispered to each other in soft voices, discussing her performance, their eyes still drawn in her direction. The judges wrote more notes, occasionally exchanging brief glances, as if confirming what they had just heard. A silence of reflection hung in the air even amidst the chatter, the kind that comes when something truly unexpected has been witnessed. For a moment, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The tension she had carried for weeks, the anxiety of the unknown, began to release from her body. Years of preparation, moments of self-doubt, nights spent practicing alone, they all culminated in this one performance. She realized that her story, though quiet and humble, had found a voice powerful enough to make people stop and listen. As she gathered her things, she noticed a young man from the earlier performances staring at her, his notebook forgotten on his lap. There was a trace of unease in his expression, perhaps even admiration, as he tried to understand how she had achieved such depth without formal training or flashy presentation. Others glanced as well, their earlier confidence replaced by curiosity and, in some cases, humility. She did not need to say a word. Her music had spoken for her. The judges began calling the next set of numbers. Each contestant took their turn, but the energy in the room had changed. There was now a heightened awareness, a quiet respect, an acknowledgement that talent could come from unexpected places. Those who had once laughed or scoffed looked more thoughtful, reassessing assumptions they had made in mere seconds. She found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her here. She remembered the old upright piano in a small living room, the nights spent practicing until her fingers ached, the early mornings when she had woken to capture the first quiet hours of the day. She thought of the small victories that had seemed insignificant at the time, mastering a difficult passage, hearing the correct harmony for the first time, the rare words of encouragement from those who had recognized her determination. Her mind also lingered on the challenges she had faced outside of music, days when the house was noisy, when responsibilities demanded her attention, when discouragement whispered that she should stop. And yet, she had persisted. Music had been her constant companion, her refuge, her mentor. It had taught her patience, resilience, and the quiet strength to keep going even when no one else believed. A judge approached her briefly, speaking in soft, encouraging words. They did not offer a judgment or critique, only a sincere acknowledgement of the artistry they had just witnessed. That small recognition felt like a validation of years of quiet work, a reminder that effort, sincerity, and passion could shine brighter than polish or formal accolades. She nodded and thanked them quietly, feeling a warmth that spread from her chest to her fingertips. As the next performers took the stage, she watched with interest rather than anxiety. Some played beautifully, technically flawless, but she noticed something missing, a certain depth that comes only from lived experience and heartfelt expression. Others showed emotion but faltered under pressure. She realized that while talent could be refined, what she had brought to the piano that day was unique, shaped by her life, her struggles, and her dedication. The audience's attention began to focus more broadly. People who had once been skeptical now leaned in, eager to see who would follow such a surprising and moving performance. Conversations were quieter, respectful, and tinged with admiration. Contestants glanced at each other, exchanging subtle looks that spoke volumes about shifting perceptions. The woman observed quietly, letting herself feel the satisfaction of breaking through preconceptions without a word. A memory surfaced from her past, a teacher she had once asked for guidance, long ago, who had turned her away with a dismissive comment. At the time, she had felt crushed, but now, sitting in that hall, she understood that rejection had only strengthened her resolve. She had learned to trust herself, to find her own path, and to draw inspiration from her surroundings, her perseverance, and her passion. Each setback had become a stepping stone rather than a barrier. The next contestant walked to the piano with confidence, a young performer who had clearly trained at prestigious institutions. They played a complex piece with technical skill, fingers flying over the keys. But something in the room shifted differently than it had for the woman. The audience and judges reacted with polite recognition, yet there was an absence of the raw emotional depth that had captivated them earlier. It was a reminder that mastery alone does not guarantee impact. Heart and authenticity matter just as much. The woman watched silently, noting the difference without judgment. She understood that every performer had their own story, their own journey, and their own challenges. Today, her story had simply resonated more deeply. She felt no triumph over others, only a quiet awareness of the power of dedication, resilience, and sincerity. A few people approached her during a break, offering kind words and congratulations. Some were fellow contestants, curious and respectful. Others were volunteers or staff who had observed her performance from afar. Each acknowledgement, small as it was, reinforced a lesson she had always held close, that genuine effort and heart cannot be hidden. No matter the circumstances, when people truly listen, they recognize truth in its purest form. As she prepared for her next scheduled piece, she thought about what she wanted to communicate. Music, she realized, is not merely a sequence of notes, but an expression of life. Every experience, every hardship, every triumph had contributed to the sound she now created. She wanted the judges and audience to hear not just technical skill, but the story behind the music, the perseverance, the late nights, the quiet determination that had defined her journey. When her number was called again, she approached the piano with steady steps. She adjusted the bench, positioned her hands, and took a deep breath. There was no fear, only presence. The previous performance had been an opening, a glimpse, and now she had a chance to share another layer of her story. The room was still and attentive, the energy of anticipation palpable. As she played, her mind focused entirely on the music. She allowed herself to feel each note fully, letting the melody express the nuances of her journey. The judges were silent, leaning forward, attentive, as if trying to absorb every detail. Contestants and audience members alike were captivated, drawn into the story that unfolded beneath her fingers. The piece flowed with a natural rhythm, a combination of strength and delicacy. She navigated complex passages with care, each note deliberate, each chord expressive. Memories surfaced with every sound, moments of struggle, moments of joy, moments of quiet reflection. The music was her voice, and she spoke with authenticity and heart. The hall seemed to fade around her, leaving only the piano, the music, and the connection between sound and soul. Time slowed, and for those listening, the experience felt immersive, transformative. The woman had become not just a performer, but a storyteller, a conduit for emotion and experience. As she reached the climax of her piece, the intensity and passion were unmistakable. The audience was silent, held in the spell of the music. Judges were fully engaged, their previous assumptions melted away, replaced with appreciation and awe. Even the contestants who had initially scoffed at her presence now watched with deep respect, recognizing the skill, emotion, and dedication that had been underestimated. When the final notes faded into silence, the room exhaled collectively. Applause erupted, spontaneous and heartfelt. The woman sat quietly, letting the sound wash over her, a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and humble pride. She had shared not only her talent, but her story, and it had been received with recognition and sincerity. In the quiet aftermath, she realized that her journey was far from over. The auditions were a step, not a destination. Yet, today had proven something profound, that authenticity, perseverance, and passion could break through doubt, challenge assumptions, and inspire connection. She left the piano with her head held high, carrying a sense of fulfillment that could not be measured in applause or accolades alone. The woman returned to her seat after her second performance, her hands still tingling from the piano. The room seemed different now, charged with a quiet energy that had not been there when she first arrived. Conversations had shifted, whispers of doubt replaced by curiosity and admiration. Even those who had earlier laughed or looked down at her now seemed unsure of how to respond. It was a subtle shift, but one that spoke volumes about the power of authentic talent. She took a deep breath, feeling both relief and anticipation. Her performances had been well received, and she felt a quiet satisfaction. But she knew the audition was not over. The judges would still deliberate, and more performances awaited. Yet, she understood that something deeper had changed. The perception of her by others, the assumptions made in mere seconds, had been challenged, and she had not said a word to defend herself. Her music had done it for her. Across the room, contestants who had previously exuded confidence now fidgeted in their seats. Some exchanged glances, perhaps questioning their own abilities. Others stared at her, eyes wide with surprise, trying to understand how someone so unassuming could produce such compelling music. She noticed but did not react. She had learned long ago that true validation does not come from others' approval, but from the quiet knowledge that you have given your best. A judge, who had appeared stern and distant earlier, leaned slightly forward, pen poised above the paper. Their expression had softened, a hint of curiosity replacing initial skepticism. Another judge whispered to a colleague, nodding subtly. The energy in the room had transformed from polite observation to attentive engagement. The woman, aware only of the music she had shared, felt a sense of calm. She had opened a door, and others were stepping through it slowly, seeing beyond appearances to the depth of effort and emotion that her music represented. She reflected on the years of preparation that had led her to this moment. In her small apartment, she had learned to practice with patience and attention, listening to each note, correcting mistakes silently, and celebrating small achievements alone. There had been no audience to applaud her successes, no one to witness the hours of dedication. Yet she had persisted, driven by a love for the instrument and a desire to express herself fully. Each day of practice had been a conversation between her and the piano, a silent dialogue that had taught her resilience, focus, and the joy of creation. The next performers were called, and the woman watched as they walked to the piano. Some approached with confidence, others with visible nerves. Their pieces were technically impressive, and yet, as she listened, she noticed something missing: the quiet depth, the lived experience that gave the music a certain weight and sincerity. It was a subtle difference, hard to define, but immediately apparent. She realized that music was not only about skill, but about presence, emotion, and the story behind each note. During a short break, a few contestants approached her hesitantly. They offered compliments, their voices tinged with disbelief. "That was incredible," one whispered. "I didn't expect that," another admitted. She smiled politely, nodding, accepting the acknowledgement without arrogance. She understood their surprise. They had judged her based on appearance, on first impressions, and her music had defied their expectations. Yet she also recognized that admiration was secondary. The true reward was in the act of expressing herself honestly. The judges continued their notes, occasionally looking up to watch the ongoing performances. Their focus had shifted subtly, their evaluations now informed not only by technical accuracy, but by expressive depth. One judge whispered quietly to another, their conversation barely audible, yet carrying an unmistakable tone of respect and reassessment. The woman observed quietly, noticing these changes without letting them distract her. Her attention remained centered on her own preparation, on being present for each piece she would play. Her thoughts drifted to the countless small moments that had shaped her journey. The nights spent learning new pieces by memory, the frustration of repeated mistakes, the quiet joy of finally mastering a difficult passage. She remembered the moments when doubt had crept in, whispering that she might not be good enough, that her effort was in vain. And yet, she had persisted, guided by an inner voice that reminded her why she loved the piano, why she had chosen this path despite obstacles. Those quiet victories, invisible to the world, had built the foundation for the performance she had just given. As the day progressed, the room became a place of learning and reflection for everyone present. Contestants adjusted their posture, listened more attentively, and seemed more thoughtful in their approach. Some whispered to each other, acknowledging that talent can come from unexpected places. The woman noticed the subtle changes, understanding that her presence had already influenced the environment, even without intending to. It was a reminder that actions, rather than words, often speak the loudest. She also thought about the role of perseverance in her life. There had been many moments when it would have been easier to stop, to surrender to doubt or circumstance. But each time she had continued, she had discovered something new about herself. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a mirror reflecting her own resilience, patience, and capacity for focus. Playing well required more than technique. It required understanding, presence, and the willingness to invest oneself fully. The judges called her number once again, signaling that it was time for her next piece. She rose, smoothing her dress and adjusting her hair, a calm determination in her movements. Each step toward the piano felt deliberate, grounded in experience and preparation. As she approached, she could feel the subtle shifts in the room, the respectful attention of the audience, the curiosity and admiration of those around her. the anticipation in the judge's eyes. She did not let it sway her focus. She had learned to center herself in the music. She sat at the piano, placing her hands gently on the keys. The cool surface was familiar, comforting, and she allowed herself a deep breath. The audience waited, the hall silent, and she began to play. The opening notes were deliberate, gentle, yet carrying a quiet strength. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, each note chosen with care. The room seemed to hold its breath, listening not just to the sound, but to the story woven through it. As she continued, the music grew more expressive, each passage reflecting the experiences and emotions she had carried for years. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the quiet victories, and the lessons learned in solitude. Every note was a testament to perseverance, patience, and passion. The judges leaned forward, pens paused, fully immersed in the unfolding performance. Contestants who had initially doubted her now sat in attentive silence, captivated by the authenticity of her expression. The woman felt a sense of flow, an alignment between mind, body, and music. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, each measure carrying weight and meaning. She was not performing for approval or recognition. She was performing to convey the depth of her journey, to allow the music to speak truthfully. The room had transformed into a space of connection, a shared experience where emotions and stories intersected through sound. As she reached the central section of her piece, the intensity increased. Her hands moved with confidence, producing rich tones and subtle dynamics. Each chord resonated with her experiences, the quiet struggles, the moments of joy, the nights of solitary practice. The audience was fully engaged, drawn into the narrative expressed through her fingers. Even the judges, previously critical, were absorbed in the authenticity and emotional depth of the performance. She allowed herself to feel each moment fully, embracing both the challenges and the triumphs of her journey. The music became a vessel for expression, a bridge between her internal world and the listeners around her. In this shared space, preconceived notions faded, replaced by an appreciation for dedication, sincerity, and the beauty of genuine artistry. The room was no longer a place of judgment, but a place of connection and understanding. When the final notes lingered in the air, the hall remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. The audience absorbed the impact of what they had heard, the judges reflecting on the depth and sincerity that had been shared. Applause eventually erupted, heartfelt and sustained, filling the space with warmth and recognition. The woman rose from the bench, breathing steadily, her hands still tingling from the exertion and energy of the performance. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and humility. The music had communicated what words could not, and it had done so without fanfare or display. She had conveyed her story, her perseverance, and her passion through sound alone, and it had been received with respect and admiration. The experience was more than recognition. It was an affirmation of the power of authenticity, dedication, and the quiet strength that comes from embracing one's path fully. As she stepped away from the piano and returned to her seat, she reflected on the lessons of the day. Talent, she realized, is not defined solely by appearance, training, or outward polish. It is defined by the depth of commitment, the sincerity of expression, and the courage to share one's story without compromise. Her presence and performance had reminded everyone in the room of that truth, and she carried that knowledge. The woman took a brief moment to collect herself, feeling the lingering energy from her previous performances. Each step she had taken in the hall had carried her through more than just a sequence of notes. It had carried her through years of dedication, countless quiet moments, and the resilience built from facing doubt. She sat quietly, watching the remaining contestants, noticing subtle changes in how they held themselves, how they interacted with the space around them. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere and newfound respect, a silent acknowledgement that talent is often disguised in unexpected forms. Her mind wandered briefly to the countless small sacrifices she had made along the way, the nights she had stayed up late, the mornings she had woken early, the times she had chosen to practice instead of social gatherings, each moment contributing to the quiet fortitude that now underpinned her playing. These sacrifices were invisible to most, yet they formed the very essence of her art. She realized that this journey had not been about recognition, but about a commitment to something larger than herself, the pursuit of expression and the desire to communicate through sound. As she observed the other performers, she saw a range of emotions mirrored in their faces. Some were confident, relying on technique and training, their performances precise but lacking the depth she had shown. Others seemed nervous, their hands trembling slightly as they approached the piano. There was a subtle tension in the room, an awareness that something had shifted, that the bar had been raised not by skill alone, but by the depth of feeling one could convey. She felt no pride in having surpassed them. Rather, she felt a sense of responsibility for having set an example of what true dedication and authenticity could achieve. When her number was called once more, the woman rose, smoothing her dress and adjusting her hair. Each movement was deliberate, grounded, as if she were marking the importance of the moment with her own presence. She approached the piano with calm determination, aware of the audience's attention but not swayed by it. Her focus was inward, on the connection between her mind, her hands, and the keys. She seated herself and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, feeling the coolness beneath them, the familiar texture that had been both a challenge and a comfort throughout her life. As she began to play, the opening notes were soft, deliberate, and expressive. Her hands moved with fluidity and precision, each note carrying the weight of experience and emotion. The judges, previously skeptical, leaned forward, pens in hand but temporarily forgotten, fully engaged with the unfolding performance. Contestants and audience members alike were captivated, leaning slightly, drawn into the narrative she was creating with each measured sound. The music was more than technique. It was a story, a journey of struggle, perseverance, and quiet triumph. Throughout the performance, she allowed herself to feel deeply, channeling years of emotion into every chord, every pause, every nuance. Memories of late-night practice sessions, the frustration of mastering difficult passages, and the joy of finally achieving clarity and resonance were all embedded in her touch. She thought of the small victories that no one had witnessed, the quiet moments of triumph and learning that had shaped her artistry. Each note was a reflection of her journey, a testament to the resilience and patience cultivated over time. The hall seemed to breathe with her, each note reverberating in a space that was both grand and intimate. Listeners were drawn in, not merely hearing the sound but feeling the story behind it. The young contestants who had once smirked or doubted her now watched in awe, realizing that her presence and skill could not be diminished by appearances or assumptions. Even those who had been entirely confident now leaned forward, sensing the profound sincerity of her expression. The judges remained focused, their evaluations evolving from technical scrutiny to deep appreciation. The stern expression softened, replaced by engagement and attentiveness. One judge made a subtle note, then paused to look up, clearly affected by the emotional depth of the performance. Another whispered briefly to a colleague, nodding subtly as if to confirm a shared recognition of the woman's remarkable talent. She did not notice these interactions. She was fully immersed in the music, each movement of her hands translating her story into sound. She moved into the middle section of the piece, a section demanding both strength and delicacy. Her fingers danced across the keys, producing a resonance that was both powerful and tender. Every chord carried nuance, every phrase was deliberate, every rest held meaning. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in, the energy in the room shifting from anticipation to absorption. Even the most critical listeners found themselves caught in the flow, unable to resist the story the music conveyed. Her mind briefly reflected on the idea that music is more than notes. It is emotion, experience, and the subtle interplay between intention and execution. Technical skill is essential, but without heart and authenticity, it is hollow. She had discovered this truth through years of self-guided practice, through moments of doubt and self-reflection, through perseverance and patience. Today, she was not merely performing. She was demonstrating the culmination of a lifetime of learning, dedication, and passion. Audience members exchanged quiet comments, their voices hushed with respect and awe. Contestants who had previously dismissed her as a simple, unassuming woman now regarded her with a mixture of astonishment and humility. The room was filled with a new understanding. Appearances can be deceiving, and true talent is often discovered in unexpected places. She felt no desire to boast. The music had conveyed everything she needed to say, transcending judgment and expectation. The final section of her piece approached, building in intensity and emotional depth. She allowed herself to feel fully, connecting with the music on an almost visceral level. Her fingers moved with a combination of confidence and sensitivity, each chord resonating with meaning. The room was silent, collectively holding its breath, experiencing the culmination of years of quiet determination and practice distilled into sound. The judges were fully attentive, their expressions showing reflection, surprise, and admiration. As the last notes were played, the woman allowed them to linger, resonating through the hall with clarity and grace. The room was suspended in a brief, profound silence. Listeners absorbed the music's weight, its depth, and the story it told. For a moment, Time itself seemed to pause, honoring the journey and the dedication embodied in the performance. The silence spoke louder than any words could, an unspoken acknowledgement of the artistry, authenticity, and resilience demonstrated. Applause erupted, warm, sustained, and heartfelt. It started small but quickly grew, filling the space with a sense of joy and recognition. The judges nodded, smiles appearing, acknowledging not just technical skill, but the emotional impact and storytelling ability conveyed. Contestants who had previously been skeptical offered congratulations, some quietly, some with visible admiration. The woman rose from the bench, her posture composed yet relaxed. Acknowledging the room with a modest bow, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not from applause alone, but from the realization that her journey and efforts had been recognized in a meaningful way. Her story, expressed through music, had connected with others, challenging assumptions and inspiring respect. She had remained true to herself, focused on her art, and now, without pretense or display, she had communicated something powerful and authentic. As she returned to her seat, she reflected on the significance of the experience. The music had become a bridge, connecting her world to the listeners' hearts. The performance had transformed the room, the audience, and even the other contestants, demonstrating that true talent, authenticity, and perseverance are recognized not by appearances, but by the depth of expression and commitment. She realized that her quiet journey, marked by persistence, practice, and genuine love for the piano, had reached others in a way that words alone could never achieve. For the woman, this moment was both culmination and continuation. The performance was a milestone, a testament to years of dedication, but also a reminder that the journey was ongoing. Each practice session, each performance, each opportunity to share music carried significance, shaping not only her skill, but her character and perspective. She understood that the impact of authenticity and dedication extended beyond a single performance, influencing others, challenging assumptions, and inspiring new understanding. As the applause continued, she felt a mixture of humility and quiet pride. She had done what she had set out to do, express herself fully, convey her journey through music, and connect with others on a meaningful level. The recognition she received was secondary, a natural consequence of sincerity and effort. Her focus remained on the music, on the expression, and on the ongoing journey of discovery, growth, and sharing. When the hall finally quieted, she allowed herself a deep breath, savoring the moment. The energy in the room had shifted irrevocably, and she had played a central role in that transformation. She understood that her music had not only told her story, but had also challenged the perceptions of those around her, illustrating that talent and depth can emerge from the most unexpected places. She left the piano bench with a steady heart, her mind clear, and a renewed commitment to her art, ready for